Good evening, She Walks Canada community. My name is Lindsay Sutherland Boal, and I am the founder of She Walks Canada. She Walks Canada is a movement to engage and empower sober and sober curious women, changing their relationship with alcohol. And we do that in two ways. We walk the walk and talk the talk. More information can be found at shewalkscanada.com. Tonight is a very special night. We have our first guest in our She Walks Canada Author Series 2023, and I am beyond honored to welcome Miss Anne Dowsett Johnston, the author of Drink, the Intimate Relationship Between Women and Alcohol. Anne, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Lindsay. It's lovely to be with all of you.
In addition to being the author of Drink, the Intimate Relationship Between Women and Alcohol, Anne is also the former vice president of McGill University, the former editor of Maclean's magazine. She currently has a thriving psychotherapy practice and runs her own writing program, Writing Your Recovery and Writing Your Discovery. And both of those programs are widely sought after. And as someone who's taken those programs, I can attest that they really do change our lives. And so, Anne, we're just so thrilled that you're a part of our discussion today.
Thank you. It's so fun to be here.
Thank you. In rereading Drink, the Intimate Relationship Between Women and Alcohol, there really are four themes that I would like to center our discussion around tonight. And the first one is, why do women drink? The second is progression and negotiation. The third is understanding alcohol use disorder and the importance of doing research for women on this issue specifically. And then the fourth is to discuss your journey as you were sober curious and then through early recovery and onto later stage recovery. And so, if I may, I would like to quote your newsletter that came out this week, which was so poignant. And you start by saying that you had Googled your sober date, 5,256 days sober. Congratulations on that. And so you continue in your newsletter saying, so finally, I need my glasses just a moment. So it finally happened. The saddest news in ages, and exactly what I predicted in my book, Drink, the Intimate Relationship Between Women and Alcohol. The National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism in the United States reports that women are binge drinking more than men for the first time in history. I'm not surprised. This has been building for years, women outpacing men in terms of emergency room presentations, ones related to alcohol intake, with the pinking of the alcohol market since the mid-1990s. The message is blaring, you need a drink today. Take the mummy drinking wine culture. Take the pressures on women with children at home who have weathered through years of COVID, juggling work and the emotional labor of running a family or dealing with trauma and grief, and the wish to numb. Alcohol is often the number one stress reliever and socially acceptable one at that, and alcohol consumption, already a top decompression tool before the pandemic, turned epidemic for women in these difficult years. And that's where we start.
That's where we start. So when I wrote my book, Drink, I was asked to, first of all, people didn't believe that women were catching up to men, definitely didn't believe it. I started with a 10-part series, 14-part series that I started reporting in 2010 for the Toronto Star on women and alcohol, and broke the story of the pinking of the market internationally and predicted that women would catch up with men. And my assumption, my after traveling the world, because I won the Atkinson fellowship, a $100,000 fellowship to travel around the world to look at women and alcohol and the issue therein, was that alcohol had become the modern woman's steroid, as I called it, which was to enable her to do the heavy lifting of a complex world. And all the data says, and this is in my book, that men are much happier than they were in the 1970s, and women are much unhappier. And the emotional heavy lifting that women do, so I'll just paint the picture, and we all know it. You go to work, you come home, you're at the chopping board. It's way easier to pour a glass of wine than it is to take half an hour to do yoga. You know that you have homework to oversee, a meal to prepare, probably more work of your own to go back to before you go to sleep. And so it's just easier to open a bottle of wine. And in my case, I knew this to be true because I lived it. I lived it as a single mom. I lived it as an editor at Maclean's magazine. I lived it as vice principal of McGill University. I knew that it was faster and more efficient for me to unhook my shoulders from my earlobes that way. I wrote a big piece after my book came out in the Atlantic magazine on perfectionism. And I think it's a key component. And that is, we must be perfect in all elements of our life. And we do the heavy emotional lifting, whether it's looking after aging parents while we're looking after children, thinking of everything that has to do with putting together a household while we're working the high-level job. And so it's no accident that it is the professional woman who got into trouble. There's a profile, and I fit the profile. So I say in my TED Talk, which now has 1.5 million views, that I am the poster girl, much as my mother was. So I've been steeped in this issue since I was a young girl. My mother was cross-addicted, like Betty Ford and so many North American women, to Valium and alcohol in the 60s. So it's in my blood. I know this story backwards. I always knew this story, and sadly, it became my story.
You know, perfectionism is a theme that just keeps coming back over and over and over again in your book, and there's just so many references to it. Most girls, and I'm just going to quote you here, most girls and women with a serious drinking problem, you ask most girls and women with a serious drinking problem, and you will get this present or past tense notwithstanding. I drink to numb. I drink to forget. I drink not to feel. I drink not to be me. And I can't tell you, like, that is the theme of what we hear in our meetings. There's also a huge connection between it releases my stress. It helps my anxiety, but we all know that over drinking actually makes the anxiety situation a whole lot worse.
Right. So we have a very ugly reality that women blame themselves. They often self-medicate, as you referred to. In my case, I self-medicated depression, which I hit really hard in menopause. I had very, very bad postpartum. I had very bad depression as a teenager. And so I found a way to numb depression, to escape from depression. So it's an exit strategy, or it's a decompression tool. It doesn't really matter. We use it, as I say in the prologue, for just about anything, to deal with social anxiety, to deal with decompressing, as I said. We use it for everything. It's an all-purpose in the prologue, which is called Booze is a Loan Shark. We borrow from booze. And then booze comes calling. Comes calling, waking you up at 3:45. It was always 4:45 for me, with that sugar rush, with that sense of discomfort, with that sense of, did I open the second bottle of wine? Near the end, that's where I was. And so sadly, this has become a well-known common story where women nod their heads. Try and buy a birthday card for a woman that doesn't refer to wine or alcohol. It's it's shocking the way it's the wallpaper, it's the water we swim in, the message that you have to drink to have fun.
Oh, totally. I love the way that you described your drinking in the prologue of Drink, that it was the man. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I say he's either the man in the elegant tuxedo standing by the bar, or he's the man in the black leather jacket. It doesn't really matter. He's always at the party, and he always gets there first. And it doesn't matter if you are overdressed, underdressed, too tall, too short, too heavy, too thin. You will reach for him. You will meet him at the party to feel comfortable. And that's a deal we make. That's a deal that we make when we celebrate at weddings, and we feel, as I say, our shoulders come down, that slim stem of liquid swagger, which I call champagne. And then booze comes calling. Booze is a long chart. Booze comes calling, and booze ends up sitting at your dinner table, causing arguments, wakes you up at 2:45, moves right into your home. And when you boot him out, he comes right back. In my case, I moved to Montreal to become vice principal of McGill. I'd been a journalist for 40 years, and I was, or maybe 30 years by that point. And he followed me to Montreal. I said I'd never have wine in my house, went in my beautiful new condo as vice principal of McGill, and I lasted a day. And that's where I got into trouble when my world collapsed. My world really collapsed, and I was confronted by my son, my sweetheart, my sister, and my best friend. And I went to rehab. Took a sledgehammer because I had watched my mother and ultimately my father lose their whole lives to this.
There's a poignant moment that every time I read it, I gasp. I mean, there's many of those in your book, but can you talk about the moment where, and I have to paraphrase, forgive me because I'm nothing as eloquent as you, but it's something to the effect of, I don't quite remember when it happened, but I do remember when I slept through 2 alarms.
Yeah. So, I think we're selective when we write books to get the point across. And I chose a very embarrassing moment when I slept through 2 alarms. I was vice principal of McGill. I had to let a very senior person go the previous evening. I had a number of drinks, and my boss, the principal of McGill, was to pick me up in the morning for a 4-day retreat out of town in a limousine. And I slept through both alarms and did not hear the doorbell. It was a life changer. It was a game changer. I knew that although she said, "Did you take a sleeping pill?" And I said no, because I don't lie. I knew that she could forgive me, but I couldn't forgive myself.
It's the truths that we know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing, actually, to hear you say that you couldn't lie, because I tell you, I was really good at that.
My mother lied my whole life in saying she would quit. And frankly, I did make that one promise. So I have a sister who's a very senior scientist, and said, "You can't tell that story on yourself. You'll never get a job again." And I said, you can't call a book Drink and not tell those stories.
I'm so glad that you brought this up, because I also wanted to ask you about your editor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so when you were preparing the piece that you mentioned earlier for the Toronto Star, the 12-part piece, and you never mentioned that you were an alcoholic in the piece.
No.
Can you tell us about the conversation with your editor?
Yes, my editor said, I said I want to come out in the Toronto Star because I want to start a movement for women, for men, actually, at that point, gathering together and saying, "It's me too."
Mm-hmm. And
we would stare down stigma. And there's a chapter in the book on stigma.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, it went into the Toronto Star. Will people come forward? And the truth was, the stigma was so large. Now, remember, this is 2012. The stigma was so large that my editor said, "Are you independently wealthy?" And I said, "No." And she said, "You'll never get a job again." Well, then I turned around and wrote a book called Drink. and after Drink came out, I did apply for a very big job, and I didn't get an interview. And it should have been a job I would have been naturally interviewed for. So it became very clear to me that I had done what I set out to do, which was to own the story and be the public face of women in drinking. But I knew there were repercussions, and it was fine.
It's so funny, because the exact same thing happened to me when I made the decision to come out publicly at 1 year, because I was very, very quiet about mine, because I had failed so many times. I didn't want to talk about it. And so when I made the decision at a year, there were a few people I needed to tell before I put that post, the slowest post of my life. And I can't tell you how many people said to me, "I'll never work again."
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's a big thing to do. It's a very big thing to do. And then I went and did the TEDx talk in New Zealand, and the book came out all over the world. And there was a very interesting question that every journalist asks me, which at the end of every interview, and as a journalist, I noticed it, which is, why did you want to write this book? In other words, why did you want to out yourself? And writing the book was not hard, but every night I would go to bed and think, what kind of person tells these stories, not only on themselves, but on their own mother? I teach memoir. You graciously mentioned my course, but writing your recovery, but that was the biggest question, as it often is in memoir, writing memoir. Why am I telling this on myself?
So what is the answer?
I was born to tell this story. I know this is my story. I was, from the time I was a little girl, wrestling with, why do people drink? Why do they put it down their gullet? There's such agency there. There's agency in putting down the drink, as you know, and getting your life back. And I can say now that I'm almost 15 years sober, there are, in my case, three, and in a lot of people's cases, three very different stages: the first 5 years, the second 5 years, and what comes next. And we don't go back to who we were. We evolve. We get to cherry pick and choose who we want to be now that we're sober. And I was fascinated by that journey. I was fascinated by how my mother got caught and died friendless and died in my arms, but with only her family as friends, and how much it had circumscribed everything about her life. Never putting down alcohol.
Thank you for sharing that. There's just so much. There's so much to talk about. Shall we go reluctantly? I think we need to move on to the next thing we're going to talk about, but is the progression and negotiation, because you just tapped into that there, about what that looks like, because it's a theme and I hear it all the time, and I would love to hear from you what your progression over time looked like.
Well, Carolyn Knapp, in her beautiful book, the late Carolyn Knapp, Drinking a Love Story, says that it is 12 years. And, you know, I always laugh. I was born at the top of the baby boom, right in the middle of it. I'm pretty average. It took me about 12 years from the moment when I started thinking, maybe my drinking is a problem. I went to an AA meeting in 1996 when it came to my time to speak in the circle. I could not say, my name is Anna and I'm an alcoholic, and an older man told me to leave the meeting. If I couldn't say it, I should leave. And I ran. And it took me it was 2008 when I got sober. So that's, you know, a lot of research that I went back out and did, and a lot of dangerous things happened. Mine was very progressive, slow, until I went to Montreal. And when I hit Montreal, I knew I didn't belong there. As a writer, as a journalist, as a creative person, I didn't belong as vice principal of McGill. And I worked very, very hard, and I was very, very successful. I raised gazillions of dollars as a new fundraiser, but I knew I was in the wrong place. And then one June day, on Father's Day, I learned that my favorite cousin, Doug, had been killed by a drunk driver with his youngest of 4 children in the front seat, and she was brain damaged. And I created the wall of why. Why am I alive? Why am I still drinking? What am I living for? I lost my childhood to alcohol. I lost then Doug, my favorite cousin. I'm about to lose myself. And I knew it wasn't going to be a glorious death. I knew it was going to be falling down the stairs or cracking my head on a coffee table. It wasn't going to be glamorous. I went to rehab, and I'm going to be really honest. I came out in April, and I snuck drinks between April and November, and realized I was going to die. And so I think the progression is quite serious. And there was a soul sickness in me. I realized that I could not save myself. And I got on my knees and went to a meeting, and a beautiful woman asked if she could have coffee with me. And we share a gratitude list every morning. And that is 15 years later. And I haven't had a drink since that day. But it is progressive. And if one allows it to progress, it's very much like the show I'm watching on television, The Last of Us. It is a fungal growth that will take over. We are addicted to an addictive substance. It's dangerous. It is a killer, and it will rob you of everything.
There's a beautiful example of negotiation. There's so many of them. You quote other people, you talk about your own experience. And there was one where you were talking with Jake and your New Year's resolutions.
Right.
I can't quite seem to, is this, just one second, negotiation. I do resolve to do the following: to limit my drinking to 2 drinks in social situations, 3 over 3 hours, no drinking alone, 9 drinks total on the week. And this is how it be, and the rules, maybe you switch from red wine to white wine, less staining on the teeth, or maybe it's no wine, only beer, no brown liquid, only clear. Vodka is now only on the weekends, never on Sundays, never alone. And then you go on to say the problem is that the rules continue to change, but your drinking stays the same, or your drinking is problematic.
Right. So, right. And at the end, I was a blackout drinker. Obviously not every night, but I was a blackout drinker. So I did not begin as a blackout drinker. I didn't, I won awards at work. I was very high functioning for a long, long time of those 12 years. But I secretly would do the little quiz in Drinking a Love Story. And over the years, I would see how my answers changed. And I would see the progression. And it does progress. And it progresses very quickly in women compared to men. Metabolically, hormonally, it's not body size. We are not built the same. We do not metabolize alcohol the same way. And telescoping is real. We become addicted faster. And so I'm not a prohibitionist. You may think I am. I may sound like one. I am not. If you can enjoy alcohol and follow Canada's low risk drinking guidelines, which is 2 drinks a week, more power to you. But it is a carcinogen. It is dangerous. It is very, very dangerous for women. We die faster. We get more diseases faster. So 15% of breast cancer cases.
So let's talk about that. So there's a ton of research in the book about why it is so important that there needs to be women-specific research done on alcohol consumption in women. Can you tell us more about what the research in 2013 when you wrote this book, but what you have learned since?
What was interesting then is there were 2 lead researchers in Canada and many around the world who are starting to look at the gender-specific territory of the frontier of looking at how it was different for women. And I had no trouble finding research, much as, people would, there were people like Nancy Poole and Lorraine Greaves doing really significant work on women and alcohol. And it is very different, and the outcomes are very different for women. And we have to pay attention. We have to be advocates. We have to speak to our daughters. We have to, and our sons, but we have to really focus on that truth. We get into trouble much faster.
There is this idea, and you speak about this too, but this is one of the ways that women are reaching the equality is to drink level for men, and we cannot metabolize our alcohol the same way. We can't process it the same way. It has a different effect on our body. It has a different effect on the brain. The way our brain takes it on is completely different than men. Like, these are totally different apples and oranges, not the same.
And to say nothing of the fact that when the pinking of the market happened in the mid 1990s and the sweet drinks were produced like Mike's Hard Lemonade and Smirnoff Light, it was an experiment. And it was an experiment because all the Johnny Walker drinkers were dying out and beer was cleaning the clocks of spirits. And they experimented with this, as they said, a whole gender is underperforming. Let's get teenage girls interested in hard liquor. And that experiment paid off. Smirnoff profits increased 66% in 2 years. So now you have young women on university campuses. They save their calories. They do not eat before they go out. Typically, they're drinking tequila or vodka shots. Why? Lower calories. And the guy is drinking beer. He probably did eat. She's 2/3 of the size. It's the number 1 date rape drug. We get into really political and difficult waters when we talk about what has happened with women and drinking.
As a segue, there are so many reasons why women drink in relationship to how our roles evolve throughout our
Right.
lives. And so this is a perfect example. So women who experience freedom going to university for the first time and understanding, living on your own. So there's a real uptick in women's drinking then. There's another huge change when we become mothers. Hello, mummy
Right.
wine culture. And then there's
Right.
another huge shift when our children leave the home and we have got all this time and space on our hands. So
Yes.
here are three significant ways our relationships with ourselves change that
Yes.
is filled oftentimes with booze.
Yeah, and my practice is full of women, and I've been in sober rooms for 15 years now. I'm very cognizant. My whole practice is with women, and I'm very cognizant of those stages. And it was empty nest time for me that really got me.
Mm-hmm.
The empty nest, the quiet house. I was fine when I was really busy with a big job and a beautiful young man that I was, you know, dancing around the kitchen with. That was fun. But when he went away to university and left a CD on my pillow and said, "Play this loudly, it'll feel like I'm in the house," it hit me right between the rib cage. And I was very depressed. So self-medication, I think, is one thing we have to just name. We self-medicate so many issues, and it's easier to open a bottle of wine than to see a therapist. And so unpacking why you drink and unpacking the whole kit and caboodle, societal pressures, learning how to go to, as you know, your first party, always having a drink in your hand, never be the designated driver. All those things are important to learn.
I love the reference of Hillary Clinton and Martha Stewart pretty much in the same paragraph. Can you talk about your mention of those two women would you mind?
So Hillary Clinton and Martha Stewart. Well, I've written a lot about Martha Stewart being, the perfectionist who drove me crazy. I had a really good relationship with my ex-husband, but my son was 5 when we split up, and I ran a household, and I had a huge job at McLean's, and I worked hard, and it was hard. It was hard. And I didn't need Martha telling me that I should do the perfect profiteroles for Christmas. I just didn't need that. No. And I think that my piece in the Atlantic on perfectionism says it all, that I'm now approaching 70, and I love looking at women's lives in chapters. I love looking at women's lives and seeing where you can stub your toe and where not to stub your toe. Where not to stub your toe. I'm at an age where a lot of people are looking at their first act and mourning it and deciding to play golf or play bridge. And I went back to school at 64 in a wheelchair because I'd broken my ankle, and became a psychotherapist. And I'm writing another book on recovery, and I started my writing classes, which are so fun. And I just think women, as Gloria Steinem said, grow more radical with age, and that I have learned to be true. And being radical, in part, is looking at what the alcohol industry is telling us. And it's basically keeping us small. It's saying, stay in your kitchen, stay at your dining room table in the evening, and you will never break a glass ceiling drinking. You never will. You never will become empowered. It won't happen. You will become smaller and smaller and give away your agency.
Which is pretty much exactly the quote from, paraphrased, what when you talk about Hillary Clinton. She said something to the effect that, sure, I could have had tea parties, but I chose to fulfill my profession.
Right.
Boom. Right.
We have so many choices. And I just really believe that we have 168 hours a week. Take an hour, sit down with a piece of paper, figure out how you're spending those hours. Make sure you're spending them the way you want to spend them. We all have to do laundry. We all have to do our shopping, and hopefully you're getting some sleep. But beyond that, there are some negotiable hours in there. And if you're handing it over to alcohol, you're not present in your life.
No, you're not present at that time, and you're not present for everything that comes after it.
That's right.
Yeah. Again, I could spend hours talking about this too. So let's move to understanding alcohol use disorder and the spectrum of this issue. What can you enlighten us with there?
Well, I'm working with a woman right now. I use her, or use my mother, who is in her 70s, is going to lose everything. Really smart woman, really, really, really talented professionally, has had brilliant, in fact. She's going to lose everything. So we put everything, and I watched my mother lose everything. You put alcohol on the table and don't shove it off, and it will over time rob you of it all.
Yeah,
it will, if you allow it to progress. And so whether you blow the whistle, I was a blackout drinker at the end. Whether you blow the whistle, or I had in 1996 when I first showed up and got chased out of AA, if I'd blown the whistle then, a lot of grief would have been saved. I didn't. Nor did I lose my house, lose my family. So we all get to choose. We all get to choose. And what I learned, which was very, very painful, that the minute I called out my addiction, it dug in harder. So between June, when my cousin died, I did the Wallaby. June, it took a full year and a couple of months for me to get fully sober. So it isn't instant in many cases.
No, it wasn't. And that's when I found your book. I read your book in July of 2019, and I didn't get sober until January of 2020, because I knew, I was sober curious. I knew that I had a significant drinking problem. I was a blackout drunk too, every night. And so I knew I had a significant problem, but I wasn't in a place to do anything about it. I certainly wasn't going to talk about it, but I was ready to listen. And for me, my listening came in a Google search where out popped "Drink: The Intimate Relationship Between Women and Alcohol." And I remember reading the title of your book and going, I've just resonated with every single word in the title. And I thought, oh dear. And what was so amazing about the book, it was the first time in my life where I felt I was understood, even though you didn't know who I was, but I felt as though you understood me, and I felt as though I wasn't alone. And it was the first time after a decade-long struggle that I believed it was possible, that there was hope for me. And that is
beautiful.
That's the power of when women have the courage to share their story. And one of the things I love about your writing course is that your writing course is not designed for people who want to publish a book necessarily. If they want to, fine. But it's about get it out. Right. Which is so important. And I respect the women who choose not to speak about it publicly. Totally get that,
Yes.
But I also value so much the women that came before me, who allowed me to see in their reflection that hope was possible.
Well, I think it's a portal. I think, whether you're writing a gratitude list or you're writing in your journal every day, it's a portal to self-knowledge, to knowing yourself. That's all we aim to do in the course. We aim to have you understand what's under your own rib cage. And I believe, much like Joan Didion said, that I don't really know myself until I've written it. And it doesn't have to be great writing. It can be point form. It's important that you listen to yourself long before others will listen to you. You need to listen to yourself. And I think it's I talk a lot about agency, and I think it's a great way to exercise your own agency, to hear yourself.
There's two things that I learned in your course. The first one was that my story, if ever I write my story, it's being written right now, because I couldn't sit down and write. I'm like, I'm here, I want to write my book. But I'm like, my story is being written. So I learned that. I'm walking the path right now. But what I also discovered was I ended up writing a bunch of stuff that had nothing to do with drinking. I was taking what you were telling us to do, but out was coming a completely different story that was such a part of my problematic use. But I had no idea that they were connected. So it was
Right.
such an awareness, through what I learned from your course. Moving along, moving along. One thing I would like to offer is that alcohol use disorder is on a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to see our use not as everybody has the same severity of the issue. So I think about it in stages, kind of like for broad strokes here. I think about it in breast cancer, 1, 2, 3, 4. Somebody who is receiving treatment at a stage 1 is not going to be effective for somebody who's at a stage 4. Somebody who needs stage 4 isn't going to get the treatment they need at stage 1. And our hope here at She Walks Canada is to help the early intervention so that we don't get to that later, three or 4. So it doesn't matter if you identify with AA. It doesn't matter if you identify with the word alcoholic or alcohol use. What matters is that we're finding where we are on the spectrum of getting the support that we require.
Yes. And I think that, to state the obvious, because you're doing it right now, is, as Johann Hari said, but long before him, others have said it, that community is the opposite. Connection is the opposite of addiction.
Yes.
We need each other.
Yes.
We absolutely need each other. So whether it's in my courses or She Walks, or I'm part of something called Ola Sober out of Madrid, which is international for women. I'm a host there. It doesn't matter. It's a matter of being connected and having others, because women, especially more than men, isolate when they drink. They tend to go home. I used to drink what everybody else drank at my book club, and then I'd go home and open a bottle of wine and drink it by myself. And we have rituals. Women have rituals around drinking. It's very interesting. It's very Jungian. It's very mythic. And to unhook from that comfort, from that ritual, is very difficult.
It's part of the intimate part.
Yes.
Yes.
That's why I said intimate. You're right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. And so to close this formal part of our time together, in your book, you're so gracious with sharing so many vulnerable, difficult moments about your own personal journey through, being sober curious and the failed attempts, and then through early sobriety, and then the realities of early sobriety, and then on through to long-term recovery. Can you talk about what happened on November 3rd, 2008?
Oh, I broke my heart open to definitely to a higher power. I used every part of me that is focused on myth, focused on I knew I was going to die. And as I said, another woman saved me. But then I had the hard journey of repairing with my son, repairing with, not successfully, with my partner. He left me when I was 18 months sober. When I was 18 months sober, my partner of 14 years left me. My father died of end-stage alcoholism 3 months later. My son moved to the States. I lost the 3 central male figures in my life, and I lost, I'm going to say, 50 to 60 pounds through depression, and was the size of this finger. And I was in desperate trouble. Desperate trouble. So just because we become sober doesn't mean we don't face enormous hurdles.
I'm so glad you said that. I think there is a preconception that as soon as we stop drinking, everything's going to magically get better. Nope.
No, you're reinventing yourself. You're reinventing yourself. And I believe the crucible of reinvention, the crucible of figuring out what will I choose for myself and what won't I, is actually the most powerful thing we do. We reinvent. We're able to reinvent ourselves because we have agency, because we've put down the drink. And
I love about what you say at the end of the book too, when you're talking about we get to choose what we
get to choose.
We get to choose.
We get to choose.
It's the power of choice. And often when we're problematic drinking, we don't think we have options.
Well, I would even go further. We don't have options.
Yeah.
We really shrink our world. We shrink it enormously.
I know that there are many people on this call that would love to speak with you. So to close this reluctantly, because I would love to talk to you forever, but
me too.
Reluctantly, would you mind reading to us
Right.
section, just the last part of the book there, and I believe you know what section I'm referring to.
Am I a grateful alcoholic, as they say in the rooms? Most days I am. For several years now, I've begun each morning with a gratitude list, one that lists my challenges as well as my blessings, especially my broken heart, which reminds me how much I loved and was loved. There is a strange alchemy associated with gratitude. Somewhere along the way of doing these lists, I found love with my life again. Most of all, I've learned that the addict's lie is just that, an untruth. It goes like this: I will always feel this way, therefore I might as well drink. And as long as you keep drinking, that lie keeps you stuck. The world does not improve. It's a self-fulfilling promise. Stop drinking, and there's no telling what will happen. Stop drinking, and you can begin the process of loving yourself back into being. The Jungian Fraser Boa once said, "You are standing on the shaky sands of doubt. Stand on the firm ground of not knowing." That's where I am today, standing on the firm ground of not knowing how the rest of my life will evolve. I may have lost the biggest love of my life, but I have regained my first love, which is writing. I have found my voice again. All things are possible. And without alcohol in my life, there are so many more chapters to come.
And Dowsett Johnston, thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay.